quality assistance code. And funds are still available for the COVID-19 air quality grant until October 15th. Some of the things you can use them for is maintenance, improvements for indoor heating, ventilation, air conditioning, HVAC systems to control the spread of COVID-19. It also provides reimbursement for secondary devices designed to destroy bacteria, mold, and other inactive viruses. And I want one more thing, an update here from OSHA on August 13th. OSHA updated its guidance on mitigating and preventing the spread of COVID-19 in the workplace and industry. It has a lot of explanation and expands on information on appropriate measures to protect workers in higher risk workplaces with mixed vaccination status. So there's a lot of good information for that. You can take a look at that, and that's all I got. Thank you, Holly.
Thank you. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our speaker today. Jared, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Jared is the Director of Occupational Medicine and Employee Health at Avita Health System. He is an occupational therapist. He's certified in ergonomics. He's a transitional work developer for the state of Ohio. He has 25 years experience in occupational medicine, and he has spoken at over a dozen safety councils, as well as the National Association of Occupational Health Professionals and the National Ergonomics Conference. So he's going to speak today about transitional work. And Jared, I'm going to turn this right over to you.
All right, thank you. I do appreciate the opportunity to talk today. If you have heard me talk before, I'm fairly informal. So if somebody has any questions or concerns or thinks I'm crazy or whacked, or just go ahead and unmute and interrupt me and we'll talk about it. We do have time to get through what we have to talk about today. So I want to make sure it fits what you want and what you're hoping to get out of this. So it's going to be a little non-traditional. I'm going to jump around a little bit. So formally, transitional work allows an employee with temporary work restrictions to work in a modified or alternative capacity for a defined period of time while recuperating from an injury or illness. So it can consist of modified work or alternative work. We'll talk about why transitional work works and why you should be interested in it if you're responsible for this aspect of your employer, because traditionally we've had things like light duty, modified duty, and they just simply haven't worked. So I'm gonna start out with like an EOC violation here and ask how old you are. So I don't necessarily have to know exactly how old you are, but the point is we're gonna talk about if you've been in an occupational medicine arena for a while, there's been a lot of name changes, but not a lot of true changes to the process or the protocol of what we do. Transitional work is different. So it is a name change, but in addition to that, it's truly a change of how we do business. So where do you go when you're injured? Hopefully it's an occupational medicine clinic if it's work related. But back in the day, you used to go to the ER. And what you meant to say, because you're on top of your game, is that you went to the emergency department. So much cooler, sounds so much better, same place, same treatment, etc. What is your number one business expense and who manages it? Back in the day, human resources would have been the answer, but you meant to say human capital management because that shows that you're on top of the game and that you're cool and you know what's going on. Then how do you keep a pulse on the human side of your outcomes? We used to do customer satisfaction, but that's played out and no one wants to do that anymore. So now we would move to customer loyalty and the people who are really on top of it.
Thanks, bye.
People who are really on top of it now say the customer experience. So we have some name changes, maybe some slight progressions throughout the time. But again, for the most part, they're very similar types of services, protocols, processes, etc. However, with transitional work, what we used to have was we didn't have light duty at a lot of employers. And then we did have light duty. And then we advanced to, excuse me, modified jobs. And that was a trend setter. We did make some specific changes there to the process, but then we went into ergonomics, and I'm certified in ergonomics, so I don't want to belittle ergonomics, but there was a time when we thought we would never have any injuries and the world would be at peace because there was a term called ergonomics. It reduces the risk of injury and it's well and good and it has its purpose, but it doesn't really address what transitional work addresses. Ergonomics is actually a component of transitional work. So then we went into a bunch of cool acronyms, EFT, which is an essential function test to see if an employee or an applicant can complete the essential functions of the job. So a physically demanding test to make sure they're fit to reduce the risk of injuries. Then we went to a functional capacity evaluation, a 2-day thorough test to see what the employee can or cannot do, sit, lift, push, pull, squat, carry, etc. Then we said employee morale, which the Bureau has indicated is one of the, if not the number one pre-contributing factor to injury. So it is a big deal. Then we started tracking turnover, saying that's why we have the costs that we have. Finally, all that's kind of evolved into one, which we now know is transitional work and why we're here to chat. So again, if you have questions, just unmute and interrupt. I'm not a fan of virtual presenting whatsoever. So we're all dealing with what we're dealing with. So another thing that was historic was IQ. So unfortunately, we've learned that sometimes someone has a very high IQ. It's basically a kid in a suit. When things don't go well, they pitch a fit. They might be extremely intelligent, but they don't know how to handle situations. So we're advancing more towards EQ and your emotional intelligence and how you're able to respond in an emotionally charged situation. So personally, are you more accepting of information when you understand it? You've been involved in the decision-making process and it makes sense, because that's what transitional work can allow. Historically, I have been doing this for 25 years. I'll make the joke that I started when I was 4, but anyway, you would go into the doctor and the doctor would say, you go back to work full duty or you don't. There wasn't a lot of discussion with the employer, with the safety manager, with the second shift supervisor, but it was just, you go back to work or you don't. So a lot of people had a hard time understanding, maybe they didn't think they should go back or they thought they should, and they hear the opposite information. So the IQ is just how well you score on a test compared to others. Doesn't really take much. You answer some questions, fill in the bubbles with the number 2 pencil. I'll show my age once again. But EQ is the capacity to be aware of, control, and express one's emotions and to handle. I get that far reading into it, and I already think, yeah, that's probably something I'm not going to be able to master and do routinely throughout the day. But that's what we would need to get to. And that's where we have a breakdown many times with injured workers returning back to work. When I was offered the opportunity to speak at the National Ergonomics Conference, dozens of countries represented. Surprisingly enough, the topic that I spoke on was how to handle when an injury occurs. So basically what we learned in kindergarten type of stuff. That was a lot of that talk. So pretty simple. You have to adequately and appropriately emotionally controlled respond to people. And the only people you have to make sure you satisfy are finance, human resources, safety, the injured worker, and the supervisor. And then, of course, in the background, don't forget, we want to make sure we keep everyone happy, including the BWC, the MCO, the TPA, the attorney, the patient spouse, the case manager, the voc rehab union. And then we'll go ahead and throw OSHA in there and all the other parties that be. So I've talked to a lot of employers over time, and they've said the M word is the reason why they can't get people back to work, and it's never going to be fixed, and it's just where we are. So does anyone want to throw out what the M word is? A little bit of interaction here. I'm begging you. No guesses.
Motivation.
Motivation is a big one. Yes, tied with morale. Those are big.
Money.
So motivation. What's
Money.
that?
Money.
Money is a big one. Yes, those are good answers. The reason why, what I hear most, those are definitely things that I hear. What I hear most, I'll give you some clues. This M word is synonymous with scumbag, dirtball, and lazy and clueless.
Managers.
Managers.
Oh my goodness. Did someone say managers?
Yes.
Not only did you
Management.
say it, but you unmuted and said it again so we could see who you are. Okay. Well, hopefully that's not it. But I'm talking about individuals born between 81 and 96, which are known as millennials. So,
Oh, those lazy people.
yes, those scumbag, dirtballs, lazy, and clueless people. So I try to tell people when I go to companies, they're individuals that were born between those years, and they do sometimes bring some difficulty, but so do people born before 81 and after 96. And we just don't want to pigeonhole ourselves to those are the type of people that don't want to work and we'll never get them back, et cetera. They're game players, et cetera. without a doubt, I've done this for a while. I would have to say that happens quite a bit, but before 81 and after 96, we have that as well. So if you start out in the mindset that this is going to be a problem and they're not going to be cooperative, you're not starting off in the right mindset. So preventing and reporting back and other ergonomic related injuries. So we are going to get to transition work if you're thinking, what is all this rambling? These are some things that I've heard. I have employers say they know, these employees know that if they get injured, they're supposed to report that immediately to the supervisor and fill out an incident or accident report form or ergonomic awareness form, or maybe even to a FROI, file of a claim. I don't hear that a lot, but supposed to jump on all these forms immediately. Here are the reasons why people might not want to do that. And I hear this from injured workers quite a bit. They don't want to be put on a list. Honestly, do you report every ache and pain to a doctor? I know at 48 years old, I don't, because all I'd be is going to my doctor saying my elbow hurts. I woke up this morning and my shoulder hurt. So most times those pains go away, and you don't want to be a pain to your employer. So you don't report them all the time. Like I said, a lot of times they go away. Sometimes peer pressure. I've got people saying, look, I've done this job for 30 years. And then you traipse in and day 2, you're going to claim an injury and ruin the pizza party, which is number 5. We have safety goals that we're trying to meet, and you just screwed those all up. Management by threat. So management says you have to do it. Is there anyone out there like me, maybe Mr. Gibson, since he's blatantly honest, anyone like me that agrees that as soon as you hear something's mandatory, well, what's the first thing you think when you think of mandatory? Anyone have a comment?
Better get it done.
Better get it done.
I know you're
That's-
looking for the rebellious answer.
Yeah, that's me. So what I think when I hear mandatory is 2 things. Okay, why is it mandatory? And what are the consequences should I choose not to comply? So right off the bat, I'm thinking, okay, what is this about? Because when you go around saying things are mandatory, the meeting is mandatory, reporting the injury is mandatory. Sometimes you need to do that and things are mandatory. But if you think about it, nothing's really mandatory except, as they say, death and paying taxes. Basically, it's a strong request with a varying degree of consequences. So when you say mandatory, well, I mean, if I don't report the injury, I'm not going to die. I probably won't even lose my job. So, I mean, what's mandatory? How much is that? So we want to educate them. And I usually start off by saying I'm raised by a guy 74 years old, my dad, big, burly, bearded welder, still welds, still does everything you can imagine. And I was raised that when you're told to do something, you just do it because you're told to do it. You didn't need an explanation. He didn't want to hear my thoughts on my opinion on the task at hand. You just did it. So if someone would have said 25 years ago, I bet in your career, you're going to talk about emotions and making sure you educate people to understand the process to gain buy-in. I would have said, no, that I'm not your dude. You'll probably find someone that will, but it will never be me. Well, here I am. So some of the stuff, if you're rolling your eyes, yeah, me too, but it's where we're at and we have to make sure we do it to get the outcome that we desire. Surveys are better than nothing, but not great. So sometimes we send out a survey and say, hey, what do you think about this? And you get back nothing, or you get back people who are kind of bootlickers that are saying, oh yeah, it's awesome. The best thing is actually go out and do some management by walking around. So people have an MBA, this would be an MBWA, where you actually go out and solicit input. You have to be careful that you are asking for it, so you never know what you're going to get. But I do retention meetings with our staff, all the staff quarterly, and I say, what are we good at? What are we not good at? Do you have the tools you need? What's your desire to stay here from 0 to 10? Every quarter, I ask every employee, where are we at? What's going on here? And have an open door policy in between. I don't want them to wait for the quarterly meeting. Training mistakes I've heard from employers. I've actually heard people say, yeah, we brought this guy in, he did some training, didn't really take, no one really understood it. We got to bring him back. I'm like, you're going to bring the same guy back that nobody understood and it didn't work? Maybe you need to look at different training. Assuming that there's common sense. That's a big one. If you go into a hearing and the magistrate or the hearing officer says, what's your policy on reporting the injuries? Well, it's common sense. Attorneys salivate at that. They love that. There's not a lot of policies. There's just a bunch of assumption of common sense. You don't want to go in and teach and train people how to lift. I used to do that. I'd go in, I'd say, hey, I'm certified in ergonomics and I'm going to take a look. No one ever told me, thank goodness you came today, Jared, because I've worked here 20 years and all the stuff that's sitting around is sitting exactly where it was 20 years ago until you came and taught us how to lift. Thank goodness you came. Now we can move on. So I don't tell people I'm going to teach or train them. That's kind of insulting. Maybe say, I wonder if there's a different way we can do that, or let's look at some options, etc. Sometimes I hear employers say equipment is the problem. This chair only has 4 knobs. Now we're going to get them a chair with 8 knobs. We never really educated them on how to adjust with the 4 knobs. So let's don't just say equipment is it. Teach people what they know. That's not really very endearing to the employee. Mandatory, we talked about that. Ignoring feelings. I think that honestly, we should be able to sometimes. We have a contract, you do work and I pay you. However, ignoring feelings is typically a trigger to where I get involved, because as the director, I don't treat patients day in and day out. But when I get involved, it's when things have gone south. The injured worker is upset. They call the employer a scumbag and the employer calls the employee a scumbag, and they're both ready to get attorneys. We need to all take a deep breath and figure out how we can get through this. And reacting versus responding. Want to make sure that you respond to your injured worker. When they come up and say, I just want to let you know that my shoulder is sore this morning, I don't want to reply with, yeah, well, that happens. I'm 48 and I work through it. And you know what? Every time you come, no, we need to say, okay, well, let's take a look and let's monitor that. How do you think that happened? What do you think is contributing to it? Is this the first morning? If so, sometimes we have aches and pains, but I'm glad you brought that to me and we're going to keep an eye on that. And then make sure you keep an eye on it. There's a study that showed that if you came up to me and told me something and I gave you a blank stare and literally acted like I did not even hear what you said, that's better than me saying, I hear what you're saying, I take that serious, and I'm going to follow up with you. So believe it or not, just me acting like I'm blind and deaf and that I can't even see you in front of me talking is better than telling them something and then not following up. So don't make promises that you can't keep. So finally, the transitional work, which is why all this got us to where we are today. So it protects the most valuable asset and typically your largest expense, which is that of your employees. It is eligible for public and private state-funded employers. It is a way to show that you care, and it really does. I know there's probably some eye rolling, and I felt the same, but I've seen it work. It'll be different based on the type of work that you perform, maybe even the shift that you perform. It's a way to transition people back to work on a timeline and structured. It's case by case, so it is truly an individualized plan. And once the grant is completed, you're eligible for 10% year-end rebate on your premiums. We'll go into that a little more. So to initiate the transitional work grant, you would fill out a TWG-1. All that does is establish your eligibility. The Bureau reviews that and says, yes, you're current on your premiums, et cetera, and you are now eligible to find an accredited transitional work developer and initiate the process. It was a one and done, and recently they changed it to where you can actually do this every 5 years. You have to have 11 employees, and then up to 200 plus. The grant amounts are laid out there as you see. I missed a comma on 6,300. I apologize for that. But those are the amount of money that's the amount of money you get per employee by the employee number. I'm sorry. And it was a 3-to-1 match, and it was a one shot. Now it's every 5 years, and the Bureau pays for 100% of it. So it's a pretty good deal when you take a look at, you have zero expense. What is included in this grant that I'm speaking of? So there's 3 main components. You get policy procedures to define how it works and what you're going to do should you get an injury, unfortunately. Job site analyses, and these aren't the HR job site analyses that say don't lift over 50 pounds and smile and be nice. These are physical demands, essential functions driven job descriptions. So we know how much they sit, lift, push, pull, squat, carry, etc. When I started doing these job site analyses, I was very proud. I had every imaginable measurement that you could have. The document was approximately 20 pages. The physician said, hey, I got this guy in here. I was very close to the physician. He was a buddy of mine. Got this guy in here. Where's the job description? I ran over to my desk. I printed it out. I brought it over. I was so pumped. I gave it to him, and he looked at it and said, so what's the guy do? I said, well, he does all these things that I have outlined in here, secondary functions, marginal functions, essential it's all in there. I said, it's like 22, 23 pages. He said, yeah, I know that's the problem. It's like 22, 23 pages. What does the guy do? Like, okay, well, I take it you want something a little simpler. So we have evolved in how the job site analysis works and the purpose of why we do it, to give the physician a snapshot of what they do at work so they make a good decision on what they can do with their injuries and restrictions. The third part is training. So we define roles and responsibilities for all parties. When I do a program, I typically require that the managed care organization have a representative present for at least one meeting for the wrap up to go over everything that we need to go over, make sure everyone is on the same page, and that we all know the roles and responsibilities of the other parties. So why would you do this and who cares? Well, it reduces costs. It reinforces management's commitment to the employee welfare. You can maintain quality and production, and you can increase safety and prevent future injuries. When we do a transitional work grant, we do an ergonomic assessment at no cost while we do the job description. I feel like if we're there taking a look at the job and spending quite a bit of time analyzing it, we're certified in ergonomics. There's no reason why we can't identify some concerns we have from an ergonomic perspective and address those as well. I cannot stand when we write a job description and there's an easy ergonomic fix that can make that job much less physically demanding. And we write the job description and then say, but I would change this. So typically what we say is it feasible to change this? If so, I want to write this job description with these new improvements so that it's more of a successful opportunity to get people back to do that job. So any questions about the grant? I know that's pretty quick as far as the process, because once you complete the grant, then you're eligible for what's called the bonus program. So any questions about the grant so far or anything I've rattled about? Okay, so the Transitional Work Bonus Program, you would fill out the TWB one. It talks about how your claims in a participation year are eligible for a year-end rebate. So basically it's an allowed status in the claim. There's been a release to return to work. The physician has identified functional restrictions. You make an offer to the employee and the injured worker accepts that offer, and there's a signed agreement, which is the TWB2. At the end of that, 6 months after the policy year, they do a 1 year look back. So how it works is you get up to 10% rebate for following the transitional work process if you did it 100% of the time. So the example is if you unfortunately had 2 injuries and one of those injuries you brought back under the transitional work program, that's 50% of the opportunity, which would be 50% of the maximum potential 10%, and you would get a 5% rebate. So not only do you have a structured program to bring people back, but they also incentivize you on the back end for using it. They incentivize you on the front end by covering all the costs to develop the program. So what transition work is not, sometimes it's easier to explain it that way. Occupational medicine, again, going back to age, the oldest system back when I started was you received treatment. You got injured, you got treated. That was it. Then maybe not old us, but we did job testing. We did some isokinetic testing that we now know is not very functional and doesn't really tell us what we need to know most of the time. Then we had the ergonomics period where we looked at job design and job descriptions and reducing the risk of injury through work process flow analysis. That was trendy and it was good and we still use it. But now with transition work, we kind of do all that. We do some job testing, although not isokinetic, it's more functional. We do treatment, we do ergonomics, and we work through getting someone back to work with communication and customer service, something in the past simply didn't happen. I remember when the physician used to look at an algorithm or the guidelines and say a back injury, strain, sprain, heals in 6 weeks. So as a good example of why transitional work works, previously you might say on week 1, I don't want you lifting more than 5 pounds. On week 2, the physician would look at the calendar and say, we're only 2 weeks in, keep lifting 5 pounds. 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks later, the doctor looks at the calendar and says, oh my gosh, it's been 6 weeks. Most injuries should heal within 6 weeks. So you can go back to doing what you did before. I don't really know what that was, but return to full duty. Just so happens that full duty was lifting 70 pounds from floor level. So all of a sudden we have an injured worker who now is debilitated, deconditioned, because for 6 weeks they've only lifted 5 pounds. They have a true, genuine concern about getting re-injured, and statistically they're more likely to get re-injured because they're now deconditioned. So those old systems just didn't work, and hence the transitional work program. So who in their organization feels like safety is first? And if not, what is first? At least one person. Safety is first.
Safety third.
All right, what's 1 and 2? I didn't hear you there. What's 1 and 2?
Uh,
Okay. So here's what I know to be true when you go out to companies. Safety is not first. Michelle, you're probably over there wanting to ream me, but money's first. Money's always first. So if you have banners in your organization and you have meetings nonstop and you have mandatory training and you constantly ram down their throat that safety's first, I'm not going to say that's necessarily wrong, but keep in mind you're opening yourself up to an interesting potential conversation where someone says, well, we said we could get this jib crane, or we could get this automated process, and we wouldn't even touch that product where we've had the most injuries possible. But the analysis came back that it was going to be $1 million. So if safety was first, you'd spend $1 million. Look at this company. Most employees think that most employers make $1 million a minute. So why wouldn't you spend that? So I just tell people, be careful and cautious when you're ramming that down someone's throat. I think you need to make it a top priority to the message that you're delivering to your people. They be prepared to answer these types of questions, because I hear them an awful lot. And logically we can, and sometimes the employees are being snide when they say it, but just something to consider. So the average lost time with reserves when claims are 2 years old, a back strain, sprain, lumbar disc, surgery, rotator cuff, shoulder, etc. That just shows when the back strain goes into lumbar disc surgery, because maybe we didn't manage it as good as we could have, costs go up. The shoulder injury, then you go to a rotator cuff issue, specifically surgical, costs go up. So we want to make sure we manage these on the front end, because money does matter. So transitional work works. There was a 5-year research study. The Bureau had shown that 86% decline in medical only and lost time claims, temporary total days decreased, and 50% of the employers with the grant program were able to get into a group rating program. So I'm not a big statistics guy. I hate when people say, spend $1 million, because even if you save just one person, I understand that, but we have to be realistic. So the BWC Provider Resource Report, this is something that the Bureau does to grade people like myself and my peer, Matt Call, who's a physical therapist. We've used the transitional work ideology for quite some time. I've actually been doing on-site therapy for over 20 years. I'd go to conferences and courses and they'd say, we're going to trial this thing called on-site therapy. And I think we've been doing that for 10 years, and not trying to say we're some trendsetter, but it was something we recognized was a way to find out what's really going on with the injured worker. Many times when you go on site, you gain some perspective that you never would have gotten if you were sitting in the clinic. So this just shows some statistics. I think one of the big ones is average days on, it says absent, but off or restricted, 9 versus 88 and 39 versus 110. And then of course, the top one, I guess, return to work rate, 45 days after injury, we're getting people back quickly. So common sense, I alluded to, but how much sense do we all have in common? How common is common sense? A lot of times a fresh set of eyes outside looking in identifies problems. Don't just say common sense is your policy, because like I said, it's a dream come true for attorneys. But many times I could have someone come in and look at my desk and say, you're certified in ergonomics and that's your setup. Well, a fresh set of eyes can help sometimes. So it's another benefit to the transitional work component, because that does involve on-site therapy. I would say most times when I'm dealing with an injured worker, when it gets to me, I'm sitting at an employer with a supervisor, with maybe a safety manager, potentially with HR, with the injured worker. And we're talking about what is the barrier to return to work. Because I recently had an employee that had a thumb injury. And when we said, why can't you go back? You're progressing well. He said, have you met my boss? I said, no, I've not met your boss. Well, my boss is an ass. Okay. Well, what about your thumb? What about it? He was very open to the fact that my thumb's fine. I've gotten my rehab. The reason why I don't want to go back is because this guy's a jerk and on and on. So we got all those people in the room, had a very candid, assertive communication discussion. And that's typically where my role is now. I go out to the employer and say, hey, the therapists have been communicating to me that you're unhappy as the employer about return to work. The injured worker is not back to work. Doesn't make sense. We're going to get everyone in the same room. And I have a lot of employers say, wait a minute, I don't know about that. So now I encourage us to, let's just sit all at the table and figure out what the issues are. No different than some employers when I say, well, if you're frustrated about the injured worker doing this, and this at home, what did the physician say? Well, what do you mean? Well, when you called WorkWell and informed our provider that you have these concerns, well, I can't talk to the doctor. I said, well, of course you can. You are paying the bill. You're part of the process. You should be communicating those concerns to the provider. And sometimes they'll say, well, I feel like the provider only listens to the injured worker. Well, that's because that's the only person talking to the provider. So please pick up the phone, call the provider. I have had some places where I've heard them say, well, the provider won't talk to me. Well, then get a different provider, because you should have a provider that's willing to discuss the claim. You're paying the bill. The provider exists because of employers like you. And this transitional work program that enhances communication needs to be utilized. So when do I go back to work? Now, immediately with functional restrictions that your employer will accommodate, gradually return to prior tasks or communication and a team approach, including ergonomics, functional tests, blah, blah, blah. But it works. It's lengthy. It's a lot of communication, but it's not real difficult. Then it was when the algorithm says so. You jump from doing nothing to everything. There's little communication. There's either no light duty or maybe light duty. No one's monitoring tasks that the employee does at work. So now when the employee comes into the provider and says, my employer has me doing way more than I should be, the provider can say, well, I just had a team meeting with a therapist every week. I look at their notes, they're on site, and they're telling me that those tasks do match your restrictions. Or, yeah, actually the therapist just called me and said, we may need to progress to off work, which are cuss words in our world, because the employer doesn't seem to be adhering to those restrictions. But it's communication with everyone involved. I'll pause for a second. Any questions, comments, concerns? This dude's whacked. Michelle wants to ream me for saying safety is not first. Anything at all? Nothing. All right. Another reason why I don't.
Well, hold on a second, Jared. Hold on a second.
Here we go.
You got to give me a chance to get my camera on and my microphone on.
All right.
First of all, I'd like to clarify that when you asked a question a few minutes ago about leading factors in the workplace and safety isn't necessarily first, you heard a female voice say profit. That was me. That was me.
I did not hear that, but kudos.
So I'm realistic in my expectations. And I've heard your presentation and enough other safety council meeting presenters to know.
All right, fair enough.
So you're all good, but
All
I do miss the opportunity to be there in person to give you a little bump on the shoulder for some of these comments.
Right.
This,
All
just,
right.
this just furthers my theory that Michelle is not really a bureaucrat.
There you go. Well, I'm still feeling those bumps on the shoulder. So there we go. So back to transitional work versus light duty. I think everyone, I tell people don't use the term light duty because of these reasons. I'll say really change the process and talk about at least modified work, but really let's talk about transitional work. So transitional work is progressive. We do slowly but surely progress them back to full duty with small increments at a time versus no duty versus full duty when you have the light duty status, or very little duty back to full duty. Transition work is closely monitored. We had a situation not that long ago where the box was checked on the Medco, don't lift over 10 pounds. We go on site, the injured worker is doing very well with those restrictions, but we find out that the part that they would do normally is 11 pounds. And I'm not making this up. We call the provider and say, hey, do you have an issue with them lifting 11 pounds? Because as the on-site therapist, I don't. I think they could do it. And the provider said flippantly, I don't care about 10 versus 11. That's what the box says. And I don't want them lifting a ton. So they got they were able to go back to full duty, which that would have never happened if we weren't on site with that communication. Light duty just typically was not monitored. Transitional work has a lot of people in it, but definitely at the core is the therapist, the doc, the employer, the employee, the MCO, TPA bureau, and hopefully not an attorney. My job is to make sure I don't have to deal with attorneys. If you're in love with an attorney or having an affair with one or married to one or whatever, I'm not trying to say that they're horrible, but we don't want them involved. Claims costs go up, and if we handle it correctly, a lot of times they're not needed. Light duty was typically the doc and the employee in the exam room saying, you got another week until you meet the 6-week algorithm, so go back to work on light duty. That was it. Transitional work is a process that is ongoing and changing. Light duty is just a program that's implemented and static and no one really follows through. Transitional work includes the job. Light duty does not. It was only the injury. We didn't really talk much about the job. A big one, transitional work assesses culture. So the guy with the thumb injury, why aren't you going back? Culture, light duty is like culture doesn't have a place in occupational medicine. We have an injury here. Shut up about culture. So I shared in the last class I did, our discussion in Marion, that the day of that presentation, I had a really good friend of mine call, and he was venting and frustrated that he was going to be released back to work, but he felt like he shouldn't even be going back because his boss called and said, hey, I got paperwork that you can come back now, so make sure you're here tomorrow. So he said, I was off for 6 weeks with surgery. This guy never called me one time and asked me about how I was doing or if everything was okay. And I feel like I know this guy. We're a pretty tight-knit group. There's only 6 of us in that department. So, man, I don't even go work for him. The only thing he wants me for is work. I thought we were friends. And I was thinking to myself, I'm going to have to use that today in that class because in 3 hours, I'm going to give him this class. And this is a classic example of what you see if there's not a lot of communication. We also did a study where we had human resources contact the injured worker and just say, you're missed. We value you. We look forward to the opportunity to have you back on our team. And when the injured worker said, if you want to know when my next appointment is, and HR is trained to say, no, because we have that information. If we want to find it, we'll find that out. But they just want to say, we just want to say that you're missed and that we hope you're doing well. Well, here's what the doctors, now I don't need to know any of that stuff. Well, interestingly enough, those patients that were in therapy started coming into therapy saying, guess what happened? Like what? HR called me. I'm like, oh, really? Well, we knew HR had called them because we'd set up this process. What they had to say? Well, something's fishy. They just said they missed me. I'm like, man, wonder what that's about. I don't know. Well, did you tell them, did they ask when your next appointment was? No, they specifically did not ask. And when I offered it, they said, that's not why I'm calling. They just said that they missed me. The second time that call happened, let's say a week or two later, we had the injured worker coming in saying, I think HR really does care about me. They called again, said they're glad to hear that I'm progressing. And yeah, things are going good. Just 2 short calls. And we had a very skeptical injured worker turn into, you know what? I think this place cares about me. A lot of times it's not that hard. On-site and clinic-based therapy and treatment with transitional work. And with light duty, it was only in the clinic. So we didn't know what was going on at the company. We weren't out there. We didn't see what the culture was. We didn't look at the job. We didn't have those opportunities. And to continue on, typically the employee is paid wage continuation and transitional work versus light duty. A lot of times it went to a lost time claim based on temporary total compensation being paid. Transitional work is a team. Light duty, again, typically is not a team. It's just the injured worker and the doc trying to figure out what's up. Transitional work is policy driven. The light duty is, yeah, we have it or we don't. The employee is part of the process in transitional work. Employee wasn't really involved a whole lot in light duty. It's just the doc dictating what's going to happen. And then the employer is part of the process where the employer in light duty is saying, well, I know I can't call the doc, but man, I would like to. Well, actually you can. So transitional work works, light duty traditionally does not. And I said one more time, did I mention culture? Because employee morale is one of the biggest pre-contributing factors to injury. So when you're talking about functional restrictions, back in the day in light duty, you'd have restrictions. And a restriction many times would be cannot lift over 10 pounds. Sometimes we would see cannot work on line 5. If you see that, I would challenge the physician to say, what about line 5 do you not like? Because more than likely the injured worker just said, I don't want to work on line 5. So now with transition work, communication and how much more involved we are with it. We said, when you say cannot lift over 10 pounds, which extremity is that? Or is that both? And how often can they perform that 10-pound lift? And from floor to overhead, or where? And is there adequate coupling, like a nice handle, or is it a greased bowling ball? And is this pace driven like by the machine, or is the injured worker able to monitor or drive the pace? And can we make some modifications so that they don't have to lift it at all? A lot of this is left up to interpretation by the employee, employer, union, supervisor, et cetera. So you want to take some of the guessing out of it and clean this up. By going on site, we can do that. So part of that transitional work grant, like we talked about, is the job site analysis. It's estimated that 95% of return to work decisions are made without the benefit of measurement. I'm hoping that's changing and that stat can be updated. And most job descriptions are completed to assist in establishing wage scales, not joint and muscle stresses. So when we do a job description, we are definitely looking at the physical demands of the essential functions of the job. So we can tell the physician and all the parties to the claim what that injured worker needs to be able to do. So the job site analysis has to be valid and accurate, comprehensive, including environmental concerns and quantitative. So some more reasons you might want a job description: accurate pre-placement testing. We have a lot of employers that are doing post-offer pre-placement essential function testing. So they get someone into a physically demanding job and say right off the bat they got hurt. Well, we need to test them out. This person, we could have guessed, would not be able to do that, but they did pass the physical, and that's where we are. We can match it to a functional capacity evaluation. Nothing's worse than paying a lot of money for a 2-day extensive test about what the employee can do, and then we can't even figure out, does that mean they can do the job or not, because we don't have a good job description. We can use these job descriptions to identify effective job rotation opportunities. We can use them for employee injuries in the future. And it is a crucial component of implementing transitional work. So we want to return to worker to work to increase morale and participation. And then I say, always ask the worker. First thing I do when I go to do a job description or a job site analysis is ask them, what's the most physically demanding part about the job? What's the most difficult part about the job? How would you fix it with no money? How would you fix it with an unlimited budget? And I'm telling you, I have 2 ergonomic certifications. I've done a lot in the Eoc health arena. So many times they rattle off the answers to those questions in seconds. And I spend an hour assessing the job, and I sit there looking, saying, I'm going to write a big report with a bunch of fancy words, but I've got to come up with something in addition to what they just told me. So I'll go back to them and say, why don't you just tell your supervisor these were, oh, they don't listen. Like, well, did you try it? No, because they didn't listen the first time. And again, it goes back to, if you say you're listening and you're going to address it, please do, because there's a saying that goes something like, you can definitely, by not listening to employees, eventually you'll turn them into people who don't speak and offer input. And that's definitely true. This just rattles off a list of all the things, or most of the things, that we assess when we do a job description as part of the transitional work program. We do take a look at critical job demands, also secondary, but we can only test on critical or essential functions of the job. We do have a quick reference spreadsheet now, like we talked about, so the physicians can have a quick way to take a look. The supervisors should sign off and say, yes, this is an accurate depiction of the job, and then the ergonomic or risk identification form. So here's real quickly, let's say if you go down to polling, about 10 down on the list roughly, not only are we going to say that it's frequent, 34 to 66%, but in that box, we're going to have a number, 50 pounds. So the physician can look real quick and say, all right, 2/3 of the day, they're pushing 50 pounds. Now behind pushing, we'll put in parentheses at approximately 50 inches above floor level with both hands. So he can see real quick from this, here's what I want to know. What are they going to be asked to do physically? And I don't need to read 23 pages to get this. We talked about this as expensive. I know you've heard direct costs versus indirect costs, but some of the things to consider in indirect costs, which are typically 4 to 10 times the direct cost. So if you have a $50,000 surgery, you may be spending a couple $100,000 to $500,000 and all these other things that you might not track or consider. But if you really took a look at it, these things add up quick and significant. Then we talked about the essential function test. Based off that job description, if you have that, another thing to talk about is cost. if I come out and do a job description, the cost is going to be approximately $300 to $600 per job description, paid for by you as the employer. And the transitional work program, it's capped at $200. So I can only charge $200 per job site analysis, and the Bureau pays 100% of it. So you're going from $300 to $600 per job to free. So it's a tremendous opportunity just from the job description standpoint, let alone the rest of the program. So can this new hire do the job? Let's say they're doing the job and they get injured or have surgery. I need to know if they can go back to doing it. I can use the same essential function test. When we do that essential function test, we provide education on biomechanics. So it's not just testing them, it's also a little bit of training. We have now established a baseline that when they came in the door, they could do it. And we're placing the right person in the right job. So I've rattled a lot. We have a little bit of time, and I'm really hoping there's going to be some questions, comments, concerns, suggestions, etc.
Hey, Jared, I have a question for you.
Yes.
So yeah, I'm the safety manager at a water utility. So what are your thoughts on like workplace ergonomic committees? And do you have any tips for maybe anyone looking to start one?
Yeah, I would. First tip would be don't combine it with safety. So a lot of people try to combine their ergo committee with safety committee. Traditionally, what happens is the safety things need to be met. And so they're discussed a lot. And then the ergo is kind of behind and they say, we can catch up with that next time. Now, honestly, I've seen where the ergo committee just falls apart, falls behind, and it's not made to be a priority. Employee involvement is a huge one. What I did at my prior employer and what I do here at Avita, I chair the ergonomic committee for Avita, and we have an employee ergonomic form. Anytime you have any concerns whatsoever, you have to fill out that employee ergonomic form, and then we have to come to your job site. We don't do a phone interview. We don't chat via Zoom such as this. We have to go on site and do an assessment, and then we have to do follow-up every 2 weeks until the ergonomic implementation recommended is done, and then 1 month and 6 months. So I go out and I say, I think you're good, and we follow up in 1 month and 6 months to make sure you are good. Or I say, we're gonna get a different chair. In 2 weeks, I follow up. Do you have the chair? Nope. In 2 more weeks, you have the chair? Nope. 2 more weeks, yes, you do. Then in a month and a 6 month, I follow up to make sure that you're still happy. And when you do get the chair, we go on site, we review how to adjust the chair and make sure that you understand the adjustments and how to be ergonomically correct in your work environment. So I would say to start off with, have a form that anybody can fill out, because that form is about tenfold as far as purpose. It does tell me what's going on, but it limits the whining, if you will. I hate to say that, but someone says, well, I need a chair. We'll fill out the form. Well, I'm not going to fill out the form. Well, then I don't think you have that much discomfort, to be honest with you, because you would fill this form out. We have something that says, why do you think this is happening? Well, if they say, because I've been cutting a lot of wood over the weekend, then HR has something to say when you file a claim in 6 months down the road that, well, you had indicated that this started here and it was because of cutting wood, et cetera. So it's a multifaceted form, although it's only a page and a half. It gives us a lot of information to drive what we're going to do in that ergonomics process and to drive consistency. So does that at least help?
No, it's great. No, thank you very much. And great presentation. We appreciate it.
Thank you. And if you'd like us to come out and chat, we'd be happy to do that as well.
Awesome. Thank you.
I don't know if it's time to close, but I want to say I really appreciate the opportunity. I enjoy giving these talks and enjoy feedback like the question that you just had there. So I want to make sure it fits to what you want, not just that you went to Safety Council. So if there's any other questions, please throw them out there.
Thank you, Jared. Appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. So our November meeting will be, the topic is aggression in the workplace, aggression and bullying in the workplace. And I want to turn this over for a moment to Michelle, who is going to tell you about the October meeting, which is sponsored or held by the BWC. Michelle?
Thank you, Holly. Holly, do I have permission to share my screen?
Absolutely. Oh, wait, you will in a second.
Okay.
There you go. Sorry.
There you go.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much. Okay. Well, I appreciate the opportunity to spend a couple of minutes talking about the premise behind what Holly just alluded to, which is a BWC sponsored statewide safety council event. The first of which is the first of two, which is scheduled for Wednesday, October 6th. So as BWC was preparing for this second virtual Ohio Safety Council program year, we were really trying to consider ways in which we could be a partner with our Ohio Safety Council sponsors and help them through a second virtual program year. And so the outcome was this concept of a mega meeting, and actually two mega meetings for the 2021-2022 program year. So we are going to be gathered on Wednesday, October 6th with a statewide safety council audience, and the program will be from 11 to 12. And we've asked the safety council sponsors to forego their otherwise regularly scheduled meeting in October so that we can encourage as many employer participants at this one event as possible. As you can see from this flyer, our speaker is David Sargus, and he is the founder of David Sargus International, and he is his organization is housed in Pittsburgh. And I hope that maybe some of you might have heard of David. He is a recognized speaker in the safety industry and works with companies and has worked with companies for many, many years. This particular presentation is titled Leading from Your Heart, and he is going to explore leadership, coaching, and engagement principles that are designed to remind people that not only is safety important to the company and for the company's success, but it's also safety is in following safety guidelines and remaining safe is in one's own personal self-interest. And we all know that, but his message is going to be designed to take it to the next level. So I hope it's intriguing enough that it will prompt many of you, if not all of you, to plan to attend this mega meeting in exchange for your monthly Delaware Area Safety Council meeting. So I encourage you to put the Wednesday, October 6th date from 11 to 12 on your calendar. Keep this flyer handy, and I know Holly has sent it out, and we'll send it out
again.
Send it again. And Holly, by the way, I've got one that's specifically designed around the October 6th event that's going to be coming to you very soon.
Oh, that would be wonderful.
Yes. Yes. And there is no need or no opportunity to pre-register for this event. You'll just click on the link in the flyer at the date and time of the event to access this live event. And then I'll just touch on very briefly the fact that the second mega meeting is on Wednesday, April 13th, also 11 to 12. And this meeting is going to be a little bit different. It almost comes to you more from, or just as much from an HR perspective as a safety perspective. And it is titled, Now What? How to Lead by Bringing Your Human to Work. And the presenter is an author and a workplace strategist out of New York City. Her name is Erica Keswin. She does have a book, How to Lead by Bringing Your Human to Work. And in talking with her, meeting with her, preparing with her for this April 2022 event, her thoughts and her message is going to feature and focus a lot on how employers, leaders, company executives, and owners have more responsibility than ever before to prepare and to manage a workplace that's not about just the people who are showing up at your office every day, but one that might be working from home, teleworking, and just the many challenges associated with staying connected personally to your workforce in a non-traditional work setting. So I hope that, again, this intrigues you all enough to consider joining us on October 6th and April 13th. And I really appreciate the opportunity to focus on this initiative in a little bit more detail. And before I say goodbye, I'll just let you know how much we appreciate the fact that the chamber continues to be an advocate for safety in the local community and partners with BWC to bring this program to all of you and to all of you for staying engaged in the second Virtual Safety Council program year. Thanks,
Thank
Holly.
you, Michelle. Thank you so much for being with us. And I got to tell you, I can't wait to get back in person. I kind of miss entering semi-annual reports. And don't ask me why. It's one of those tasks, that gets you away from real thinking. Now
I
that
think
you
we
don't
need
have
to,
things to do
I
today.
think we need to check her temperature.
Yeah. So hopefully we will see you all, but we will see you in October. Thank you, Jared. Again, thank you to all who attended today, and stay well, stay healthy, and we will see you all next month. Thank you all. Good
Bye-bye.
job.
Thank you.